The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
This is a reading from the Good News according to Luke. Jesus told the disciples a parable about their need to pray always and not to lose heart. He said, in a certain city there was a judge who neither feared God nor had respect for people. In that city there was a widow who kept coming to him and saying, "Grant me justice against my opponent." For a while the judge refused, but later he said to himself, "Though I have no fear of God and no respect for anyone, because this widow keeps bothering me, I will grant her justice, so that she may not wear me out by continually coming." Bit of a bleat, isn't it? And the Lord said, "Listen to what the unjust judge says. Will not God grant justice to his chosen ones, who cry to him day and night? Will he delay long in helping them? I tell you, God will quickly grant justice to them. And yet when the Son of Man comes, he will find faith on earth." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
As I said at the beginning of Mass, this is a fairly significant anniversary this week. I think it was October the 12th, 60 years ago, that the bishops of the world came to Rome for the Vatican Council. And that's been quite significant. Those 60 years, I kept thinking during the week, are the sort of bookends of my life as a priest. I was ordained in 1963, just as the council got moving. We'd spent 8 long years reading Thomas Aquinas in Latin, understanding Aristotle's categories of philosophy, and then they changed the rules. The church moved in another direction, not quite, but just to get a laugh line out of it. Interestingly, although the texts of the courses I was doing really did reflect a previous church, the fellow students I had, my colleagues, actually, this is not a modest comment, but a hell of a lot smarter than I was, were my own teachers of the contemporary movements in the church about liturgy and so on. So it wasn't entirely black and white, as I might have said. Something about the Vatican Council. It was the largest meeting of people in the history of humankind. The largest meeting of its kind. Went for 4 years. It brought 2,000 people from every corner of the planet together. They met in Rome, and they came out with the conclusion which we see as the documents of the Vatican Council. Short, isn't it? Largest meeting of its kind of all time. We're having the Chinese, I forget the name of it, but anyway, the large meeting in Beijing at the moment with Xi and the leaders there. That's a very significant meeting. This was larger, and it went for 4 years. So, during my second point is during the plenary council here in Sydney that happened a couple of months ago, I met a young British-English journalist. His name was Christopher Lamb, and Christopher Lamb is, I don't know, 40, 45, something like that. Very attractive, interesting, good journalist. He writes for The Tablet. If you know that, it's a British weekly magazine, which is a superb, beautiful summary of just what's happening in the church. Anyway, I met Christopher Lamb, and we had a bit of a good time together, and he was a great commentator on the plenary council. But in the latest edition of the tablet, he described that 60 years in an analogy to football. And I'm going to read it to you. It captured my fancy, I must say. It's interesting that Lamb came out to Australia once before as a schoolboy from one of the schools in London, and they had to play St Joseph's at Hunters Hill. So they were beaten thoroughly. So this analogy with football might have something to do with his memory of Sydney a few years ago. But let me explain the analogy. He sees the church 60 years ago as a once brilliant football team. After the council, the church was a superb side. The thoughts that came out of the council, the new sense of future, we were very excited by it, as I still am now. It had its star players like Karl Rahner, Joseph Ratzinger, Edward Skillebeck. You probably know those names, but they were the top theologians, the thinkers, the architects of the Vatican Council, who could take on any team. Few came close to beating them. But then the sides split up. Ratzinger and Henri de Lubac, another one of the stars, decided to form their own team. Now, Lamb is referring to the fact that there was a big split in thinking between two magazines. I won't go into the details, but they moved the council in different directions. They didn't have the same interpretation of what happened. So Ratzinger and Lubac decided to form their own team. Then the great players in the Vatican Council team retired, and the prestige of the council became frayed. Being beaten opponents started scoring goals. A low point for the fading giants came in 2007, when the pre-Vatican liturgy was given the green light. Now, a comment. That meant the Mass facing the wall, with the altar turned round to the wall, which we used to have, for those of you old enough to remember. That was given, they said, okay, let's allow that to happen. And Lamb is saying that was a big step backwards in this time. In 2013 came the election of Pope Francis. A club with a great legacy but low in morale acquired a dynamic new coach from Argentina. He brought in some brilliant young players from Asia and Latin America. Lamb's referring to the fact that, you probably know, that the cardinals that have been made by Francis have been chosen from the most unlikely corners of the world. And the cardinals will elect the new pope. So Lamb, in this sort of football analogy, said the new coach brought in players from Asia and Latin America, which he did. He insisted that they were doing nothing new, but was restoring the basic teamwork and tactics that have made the Vatican team to such a great side. But there were some inexperienced players in opposing teams, uncannier and more ruthless. So he concludes this by saying, and there's still a long way to go. That's his analogy, by the way. Might appeal to you, might not. I rather liked it. It's summed up what happened in my simple image. The council happened 60 years ago. It was full of ideas, full of excitement, fully a new face to the world. The church prior to that was facing inwards. It was concerned about its own own health. The council said, no, we must face outwards to the real concerns of the world. In fact, I had a phrase which said, the joys and hopes, the griefs and the anxieties of the men and women of our age, especially those who are poor and in any way afflicted, are the joys and hopes of the people of God. So our concern is not just, oh gosh, we're getting old and where are the young people? By the way, they're real concern. But our primary concern is this violent and broken and disproportionate world in which we're living. That was the direction that the council took 60 years ago, I believe. It was based upon two words. Let me take some water. I'm going to try out my French. The two words that came from Pope John the 23rd were ressourcement. Now that's my schoolboy French, by the way. It simply means return to the sources. We need to renew our church. We need to return to the sources. And so I think you and I probably know a lot more about Scripture now than we did 60 years ago. Ressourcement, return to the sources. And the second principle was aggiornamento, which I think is an Italian word. It means make sure your language is the language of today and not the language of yesterday. So those were the two principles that John the 23rd established at the beginning of the council. Ressourcement, return to the sources, and aggiornamento. Make sure your language makes sense. And so it's happened. You'll all have your own memories of that 60 years. You might be disappointed. You might think we might, we've moved in the wrong direction. Well, I respect your opinion, but I gently don't agree. I think this is the only direction we could have moved in. That we need to refine it, and there's a lot more work to do, absolutely. That there's this new coach from Argentina, who, by the way, has received a lot of opposition, as new coaches often do. He's a man who's gently and moving in the direction which I think is very consistent with the Vatican Council. And that's what he's making. My last comment, I don't think I've got time for this, but anyway. There's a book I was talking about 2 years ago, grabbing people by the lapel saying, you must read this book. I'm a man of enthusiasms about certain books. This one's an Irish book. It's called This Is Happiness. And it's the theme of the book is the last Irish village to get electricity. And so the theme of the book is trying to convince these people who hadn't electricity that this new sense was coming into their village. And the book ends with two very elderly villagers saying,